Okay, let's get into this. We're doing a deep dive today, and we're zooming in on just one day, June 5th, 2025. We've gathered some key market news, mostly from CoinMarketCap articles published that day. And our goal, pretty simple. Go through these, see what jumps out, and figure out what this one-day snapshot tells us about the crypto vibe back then.
Yeah.
And right off the bat, there was one piece of news that really made waves. A huge Shiba Inu transfer.
Yeah, that SHIB movement was definitely the big headline, the scale of it. Well, it certainly seemed to catch some people's attention, especially on the institutional side.
Catch attention, I'd say. The source mentioned it shocks Coinbase Institutional. We're talking about, let me get the number right, 2,869 tip, 483,918,550 SHIB.
Yeah.
Just wow.
Right. And that's the crucial bit from the report. It wasn't just a massive amount moving. The fact that the commentary specifically calls out the reaction at a platform like Coinbase Institutional, well, it suggests that some pretty significant players were either part of it or at least watching very, very carefully.
So institutional eyes were on this.
Exactly. These kinds of large transfers, especially when they touch institutional platforms or known major wallets, they're often seen as, well, potential clues. Indicators maybe of big strategy shifts or changing sentiment. For market reporting to label it shocking, that implies it really stood out, even to folks who handle large volumes all the time. It tells us that on June 5th, big money was definitely making some noticeable moves.
Huh. Fascinating. Just one transaction sending that kind of signal. Okay, it wasn't only SHIB making news that day. Let's pull back a bit and look at some other market signals from June 5th. Give you a broader picture. What else was going on?
Well, Dogecoin was definitely in the mix. Reports pointed out that its price had actually slipped below a key support level around $0.20.
Right, I saw that. But what was interesting, based on the analysis back then, was how people were reading that move. It wasn't just seen as, simple panic selling. The analysis suggested it might have been a calculated liquidity sweep. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that actually mean?
Sure. It's a technical analysis idea, really. It suggests that the dip below that support level wasn't just random market noise. The theory is that some traders, maybe larger ones, might deliberately push the price down. Why? To trigger all the stop-loss orders that other people likely placed just under that $1.20 mark.
Okay, so they sweep up those sell orders.
Exactly. They sweep up that available liquidity, those sell orders, and potentially grab a bunch of DOGE at a lower price. So it reframes the dip not just as market fear, but maybe as a strategic play based on where people probably set their safety nets, their stops.
Okay, got it. So possible technical games with DOGE. Now, shifting gears, XRP. That was a really interesting one on June 5th, almost. Contradictory signals, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely. On one hand, you had some pretty positive news. Dubai giving the green light to the RLUSD stablecoin.
Yeah, and the commentary linked that directly to boosting institutional confidence, right? Made sense.
Definitely. And it wasn't just talk. The reports also suggested it was fueling some short-term XRP price momentum. Getting that kind of regulatory nod from a place like Dubai, well, that's generally seen as a good thing for adoption, especially institutional.
But I sense a but coming.
Yeah. Here's the twist. Other data from the exact same day showed something else entirely. XRP ledger activity. The actual usage of the network reportedly dropped to its lowest point in 8 months, actually.
Wow. Okay, that is a contrast. Good regulatory news, price bumps up. But the network itself is seeing less action. How do you square that?
It really highlights just how tricky interpreting the market can be day by day. You've got this positive story, the Dubai news clearly affecting sentiment, maybe boosting the price short term. But then you have a core fundamental metric, the actual ledger activity, painting a less rosy picture about usage right then.
So you can't just look at one piece.
No, you really can't. It forces you to weigh different kinds of information. Short-term price moves don't always track perfectly with the underlying fundamentals. Both things were true on June 5th. The good news and the activity drop made for a complicated picture if you're trying to figure out XRP.
Makes sense. Never simple, is it? Okay, let's talk Bitcoin, the big one. What was BTC doing on June 5th?
Bitcoin was basically holding steady, right around that $105,000 mark.
Holding steady, but was there underlying tension? I remember seeing something about pressure on support.
Yes, exactly. The analysis pointed to the 50-day moving average. That's a key level a lot of traders watch. The average price over the last 50 days, it was sitting just below where the price was and seemed to be under pressure. The reports mentioned this was happening near a triangle tip on the price chart.
Ah, a triangle pattern. That usually means potential breakout, right?
Yeah.
Or breakdown.
Precisely. It signals things might be coiling up for a bigger move. So Bitcoin was kind of at a technical crossroads. The analysis basically laid out the scenarios. If it broke upwards decisively, maybe $110 K was the target. But if it broke down below that triangle, and especially below that 50-day average, well, then you'd be looking at lower price targets.
Right.
It just shows how focused traders were on those specific chart levels and indicators that day, trying to guess the next direction.
Okay. And one last piece from that day's commentary, the inevitable cycle comparisons. Always a hot topic. What were people saying back on June 5th?
Right, those are always floating around. We saw a couple of different takes, actually. One view compared the current cycle, hashtag CryptoCycle2024 they called it, to the pattern seen between 2014 and 2017.
Okay. And what was the implication of that comparison?
Well, it came with a pretty stark warning, something like most won't see it coming, and people should brace for a rude awakening. So definitely a more cautious, maybe even bearish outlook there.
Oof. Okay. But that wasn't the only historical lens being applied, was it?
No, there was another perspective making the rounds on the same day. This one talked about a potentially delayed but explosive finale. It compared the situation more to 2017, that classic big climb, and then the sharp fall, but suggested it was just happening later this time around.
So one camp saying, watch out, feels like the lead up to a fall, and another saying, no, the big finale is still coming, just taking its time. That's quite different.
It really captures the uncertainty, doesn't it? People use historical cycles to try and get a handle on things, but when the comparisons themselves point in potentially opposite directions, well, it shows there's no easy answer, no real consensus. Both those ideas, the cautious one and the delayed boom one, were being actively discussed on June 5th. It reflected that lack of, strong conviction about where the market really was in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, let's try and weave this all together then. From June 5th, 2025, we had this huge SHIB transfer grabbing institutional headlines.
Right, the big money moves being noticed.
DOGE dipping below support, but maybe as a strategic liquidity sweep.
Technical analysis playing a big role in interpretations.
XRP getting good regulatory news and a price lift, yet seeing its actual network activity drop.
Those really interesting conflicting signals within a single asset.
Bitcoin sitting right at a key technical decision point, around 105K.
Highlighting the focus on charts and specific levels.
And analysts debating whether this cycle felt more like 2014-17 or a delayed 2017 peak.
Yeah, that fundamental uncertainty about the bigger picture. So if you put all those pieces from June 5th together, what kind of market does it paint? It suggests, I think, an environment where, yes, institutions are clearly watching, maybe acting, where technicals are driving a lot of the narrative, where you absolutely have to look deeper than just the headline news for an asset because the signals can clash, and where there's still a very active debate, a lot of uncertainty about the market's overall phase or direction. Understanding these specific details, all pulled from that one day, really helps build that richer, more nuanced picture of the market dynamics and sentiment then, which is, what we aim to do for you.
Absolutely. Quite a snapshot from just one day. That massive SH move, the potential strategy behind DOG's dip, XRP's confusing signals, Bitcoin on the technical edge, and that whole cycle debate.
Yeah.
All happening concurrently.
And maybe final thought for you, the listener, to chew on based on all this from June 5th. How do you weigh things when you see that kind of conflict? Like with XRP, does positive news override low usage data for you or vice versa? Or with the cycle debates, which historical pattern feels more resonant with what you're observing now? There's rarely one clear answer dropped in your lap. Part of navigating this space is figuring how you process these diverse, sometimes contradictory pieces of information. So definitely keep watching all these different angles as you do your own deep dives.